Hi, Chloe. The stream's now live.
Lovely, thank you, Jack. Good evening, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Community Development Group. Before we commence with proceedings, I can confirm that the Council has adopted some basic etiquette rules for its remote meetings. For ease, these are as follows. Only speak when the Chairman invites you to do so. Members, please let the Chairman know when you want to speak via the chat function. The Chairman will introduce speakers in the order that the request to speak was made, unless there is a point of order which will be prioritised. Please minimise all distractions while you are in the meeting. Members are asked to mute your microphone when not speaking and consider turning off your video to reduce interference on the audio feed. Please bear in mind that there may be a lag between speaking and other attendees hearing you. When referring to reports, please quote the page and paragraph number. There is no private business for this evening. However, members are reminded that it is their responsibility to make sure that their venue and connection is private. If you do lose connection at any point and are unable to immediately rejoin, then please call the meeting facilitator. Contact details have been provided. Please only use the chat function for the purpose prescribed for requesting to speak or for a point of order. The chat function is subject to the Access of Information regimes, FOI, EIR, and also subject to data protection, rules of defamation, and the Council's Code of Conduct. For this meeting, councillors are identified by a prefix of a councillor before their name. The officers in attendance are identified with the prefix of officer. There is a minute taker and a meeting facilitator for this meeting. We have received apologies from Councillor Mrs. Waters, and I can confirm that the meeting is correct. The Community Development Group consists of the following members: Councillors Mrs. Dervish, Mrs. Garrett, Hensman, Mrs. Parker, Mrs. Pell, Ms. Weeks, Ms. Wilson, and Councillor Wright. The officers for this meeting are Emma Wisby, Governance and Member Manager, Sherry Root, Corporate Director, and Jessica Mann, Governance and Member Officer. We are also joined by Mr. Peter Conn, a representative from the Elscone to Kelvin and Cycleway project. My name is Chloe Waite, and I'll be the meeting facilitator for this meeting. I will now hand over to the Chairman, Councillor Mrs. Garrett. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to start by welcoming you all to this virtual meeting of the Community Development Group. My name is Councillor Mrs. Garrett, and I'll be chairing the meeting this evening. I'm being assisted by a governance officer and a meeting facilitator who will help me identify when people want to speak and manage the notifications through the chat function. I obviously can't see all of you, so please let me know using the chat function if there are any issues with your internet connection. Please also remember to mute your microphone when you finish speaking. Members, for this meeting, when I seek your agreement, silence will be taken as assent. As the meeting facilitator has confirmed the attendance of members and officers for this evening, I shall now proceed with the business of the meeting. So, agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I believe we've mentioned Councillor Walters as being absent, and everybody else is in attendance. If there are no more apologies, I will proceed to item 2, the declarations of interest. So, do any members have any disclosable pecuniary interests or other pecuniary interests or non-pecuniary interests that they may wish to declare for this evening? Please state the item and the nature of your interest, and please indicate if you wish to speak in the chat function.
Chairman, we have a declaration by Mrs. Pell on the chat function that says that she is a member of the cycling group. That in itself is not necessary to be declared because this is a meeting of the scrutiny committee looking at the cycling and walking provision within the district, and Mrs. Pell was appointed to that group by the council itself. There are some members within this meeting who are aware of our first witness, Mr. Peter Conn, as a member of that group. So therefore, whilst it's not necessary, I make a declaration on behalf of all the members that they are aware of Mr. Conn through the council's other meeting venues, in particular the cycling steering group. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Emma. So if there are no more declarations, I'll proceed to item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Members, for this item, I will be seeking your agreement. Therefore, silence will be assent. However, if a member wishes to raise an issue in respect of the minutes, please indicate via the chat function. Do any members have any objection to the approval of the minutes as an accurate record of the meeting held on the 17th of February 2021? No, I've read through the minutes. Thank you, members. Your silence is agreement that the minutes are an accurate record. Right, we'll now proceed to item number 4, public question time. But I don't believe we have anybody this evening with questions, do we?
No, Chairman, I can confirm there's no registered speakers for public question time this evening. Thank you.
Members, so there are no registered speakers for this evening's. So I'll proceed to item 5, cycling and walking in the Braintree District. The scrutiny review into cycling and walking in the Braintree District evidence gathering session. So this is our first evidence gathering session. And I'm pleased to advise that Mr. Peter Cole, representative from the Earls Cone to Kelvin and Cycleway project, is in attendance this evening as part of the evidence gathering session for the scrutiny review into cycling and walking. I'd like to start by welcoming Mr. Cone to the meeting. Members, I'll be shortly asking Mr. Cone to speak to the committee on the Cycleway project and his experiences thus far, the successes and challenges and the impact on both residents and local communities. I'll then invite members to ask their questions of Mr. Cone. Mr. Cone, if you could therefore please kindly introduce yourself to members and provide a brief summary of your experiences. Thank you.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to do this. My name is Peter Cone. I'm the chair of Corkershaw Neighbourhood Plan Group, and as a byproduct of that, I'm now the chair of EC2K, Earls Colne to Corkershaw plus, to Kelvin, sorry, plus. We added the plus because we've added miles to the potential project. So because this is a scrutiny committee, I've put my my words into 5 headings, really. Understanding local government, project management, advice, funding, and practical issues as a way of dealing with this. And I'll use examples from EC2K in doing that. And just a bit of background for me, I worked for the health service for 40 years in a whole variety of roles. So that might explain some of the perspectives that I have. So I think the first section would be understanding local government. I think if you're going to try and create a cycleway in what's a very congested landscape, understanding how local government works is really essential. I think most people actually have no idea at all how local government works, especially that there are 3 tiers and that there are different responsibilities in each of those tiers. And all of those are important when you're coming to do the EC2K. Clearly, highways is at county level, the majority of planning is at district level, and the parishes are absolutely critical. So I think that, I mean, my experience is because I worked for the health service and worked in many cooperative ventures with different parts of local government. It gave me a bit of a head start, but to be honest with you, the neighbourhood plan has increased my knowledge of planning to an extent that I'd rather not, but in I can see Sherry smiling, but you know, essentially it really has helped to understand how that works. And also that understanding is about stakeholders. You've got to understand all of the stakeholders to be able to run a project like this. So the second part is project management, and I've been used to running all sorts of projects, both capital projects and schemes of every sort. And so I suppose I bring to it an understanding of project management. And I think that's an immense help. And I think without that, without project management, or without somebody who understands how to run projects in any sort of group like this, it would be an uphill struggle. And that's having a plan to start with, understanding the stakeholders. And I did one piece of early work that we did in EC2K was a stakeholder analysis. And from that, I've constructed an Excel spreadsheet with probably over 100 names on it now, with contact details and all of the different groups that I've been invited onto since then, with all their contact details. I mean, clearly, this is not a public document, but it's to understand all of the people involved and how to get hold of them, basically. And the other thing I think that you need in project management is a group that's prepared to do some work. One of the things that I said very early on to all of the participants is I didn't want people who we were carrying, because there's a lot of work for the chair and the secretary of the group to do. But if everybody is not prepared to, put some time in, then it won't work very well. And so we don't really want people who we're going to carry. And that's been a really good part of EC2K. We've got members from every parish along the route, which now extends from Kelvin Station to Halstead through Corkershaw and Earl's Colne. So there are 7 parishes or town councils involved in that. We've got district council members. Sue is there, and Councillor Pell on the Halstead section, and then Essex County, who clearly are really important for this. Quite apart from anything else, they are one of the major landowners, and without them as a landowner, you're missing quite a lot of the opportunity. So we've got council members from county councillors and district councillors and so on. And actually today, everybody's been prepared to work hard, which is why a lot of progress has been made over the last year. Surprising amount of progress from my perspective, but it's because so many people have done all the things they said they were going to do. The third section I'd talk about would be advice. We were very fortunate in the course of this year in having Gear Change, which is the national policy document, which came out last July. And associated with it is LCN 1/20, which is the technical document which backs it. And that technical document is an amazing resource, really. It has all of the technical detail, or a lot of the technical detail that you could possibly wish for in thinking about things like road surfacing, the cycleway surfacing, what width you need the cycleway to be, because if you want 2 cyclists to pass each other in going in opposite directions, they need a metre each because cyclists wobble. And all of that sort of level of detail is in that document. But we've also been very fortunate in having quite a lot of support from Essex Highways, from the cycling sport officer there, Chris Radley, and also from Sustrans, who are the national cycling network. I suppose they run the national network of cycleways. They were government funded and EU funded at one point, but are now essentially a charity who are who you can access but need to pay for. We've had quite a lot of support from them without having to pay anything, which has been absolutely marvellous and a marvellous resource. And Essex Highways themselves, two of the county councillors have funded a feasibility study from Essex Highways. And so the technical advice there is really important. Quite apart from just understanding what the costs of the project would be under different circumstances, you know, what sort of surfacing might cost and so on. It's part of the aim of the cycleway that once you put it in, it's maintained. There's absolutely no point in creating something that then 2 years down the line is unusable. It's got to be maintained. And so being adopted by the county council would be one of my aims for EC2K, that it's maintained into the future as part of the infrastructure for Essex and for Braintree, that you need to be able to think about it. And then that's one of the issues about the technical advice that you get, because of course, if you surface something with a metal surface, then it's more expensive to begin with, but the maintenance costs ongoing are less. If you go for one of the other surfaces, it might be cheaper to begin with, but it's a false economy if you look at it over a 10-year period. And I think you've got to look at these projects at least over a 10-year period to see what the costs are going to be. And all of those advisory things are leading into the BDC policy as well, which is being created at the moment. And the district is prepared to go out to consultation on the draft strategy in May, and that draft strategy is, I think, a very good document. It's a very long document. I'm not sure how many people are going to read it, but I've read it cover to cover, and I think it contains all of the things in there that you would want to see. Perhaps a greater emphasis on the rural connectivity, but then that's the sort of comment that you would expect me to make compared to somebody who lived in Witham or Braintree. So the fourth element is funding. Clearly, funding is vital. The capital scheme that we're sort of thinking about, the outline figures from Sustrans for a separate safe cycleway, 3-metre metal cycleway, are in the region of 800k per kilometre. So this is a substantial piece of infrastructure which will cost money to do properly. A lot of the money is spent on the footings. So you've got to put the right sort of footings in order for the to produce a surface that will be capable of being used by disabled people, by mums with pushchairs or dads with pushchairs, gender neutral, and any other sort of user. I mean, I'm also thinking with EC2K in mind of both commuting, because it needs to connect to the station at Kelvin, and potentially for cargo bikes. So on the whole of the route, there are two large industrial parks. There's the Arboretum, and if we're able to connect to Kelvin Station, then there's the opportunity for tourism, and for people coming out from London, and doing a tour that would lead them all the way through, connecting up with other cycleways, perhaps the Flitchway. You could envisage, once the whole plan is in place, that people will come out and do huge circular cycles through the countryside here, and stopping for coffees and beers and meals and all of the other things that would benefit our villages from that sort of activity. So funding is an obvious problem, and there are some big obstacles on our routes. And the route from Kelvin to Corkershaw is a very complex route, and I can talk about each of the sections perhaps in some more detail, perhaps with when we come to questions and answers. But for instance, crossing the A1124 at the Halstead end of the route, there used to be a railway bridge there. That bridge was taken away in 1964, and now the main road there is a very fast and it's 50 miles an hour at that point. So how you get across the A1124 is a significant issue. Do you bridge it? Can you put a ramp down to get to a more level place? All of those sorts of issues. So there are some large obstacles that need to be overcome. But I would say that from the point of view of raising money, having seed corn funding from a public body and obvious support from public bodies, such as the councils, is really important. It tends to unlock other funding sources. So grant-making agencies, for instance, are much more likely to offer grants if they know that there's a commitment from councils to support a cycleway. And it's also much easier to raise money from the public. So two sources of funding there, either the sort of community fundraising, which doesn't tend to be very large sums of money, but you're hoping to engage large numbers of people that you want to support the project. But there's also private benefactors who are, and there are a number of wealthy people around who might be interested in this sort of project. And all of those other sources of funding are much more likely to come if there is some seed corn funding from public bodies. And the fifth element I was going to talk about is the practical element. And the first is landowners. This is a very congested landscape. So there are some potential elements of the route which are owned by highways already, and that's a much easier, relatively speaking, conversation to have. other landowners, you're relying to a certain extent on altruism. So we've been very, very lucky, for instance, with the Earlscott to Holstead section, in that the major landowner there has given his permission for the use of the old railway line, which runs across his land and which he owns. And without that, that route would be very difficult to see how you'd do it. The opposite end of the route, the Kelvin to Corkershaw end, I've spoken to probably 14 or so landowners, and some of those conversations are very tricky. I mean, it's there are very few opportunities in it for landowners, because you're expecting people to go over your land, potentially to infringe on it, to infringe on routes into fields if they're farmers, so that you've got all of the issues of large farm vehicles crossing over the route and so on. You can imagine, really, from a landowner's perspective, there's very little that's attractive about giving space to a cycleway. And so, I'm not surprised about that. I mean, my part of my background is in farming, or I come from a farming family, so I understand that perfectly. However, there needs to be negotiation to be able to use privately owned land as well as publicly owned land. Otherwise, none of these routes are possible. And so one of the things that that's found its way into the BDC policy is about whether it's possible to find some sort of support for landowners along the lines of things like set aside, which give some sort of advantage to landowners to be positive about creating cycle routes. Otherwise, you are relying on altruism, and there are plenty of altruistic landowners around, but there are also people who've just said no, not interested. So that cuts down your opportunities. And the second thing about practical is support from highways. That's clearly absolutely vital. I mentioned it already. We've been lucky to have support from the councillor in charge of Essex Highways, and he has given us access to the cycling advisor. But what I would say is that the amount of cycling advice, technical cycling advice, is too small. There's one person for Essex, and he is completely overrun. So actually getting time from Chris is, I mean, he's been very good in supporting EC2K, but I'm hyper aware that he's got endless other responsibilities, and that the amount of time he can devote to us is going to be limited. I've mentioned the feasibility study. The technical feasibility is absolutely crucial, both for getting an idea of the cost, but also about how do you overcome different issues. And I've learned all about PV2 assessments and all sorts of other interesting technical stuff which I had no idea about before this. And the final thing would be about adoption and maintenance. It's relatively easy to get together a group of interested people to put together a project like this. but maintaining a project once it's in place is absolutely essential. And really, I think that part of my reason for wanting to include so many councillors in the project that I'm doing is that this doesn't become a 5-second wonder that disappears after a year, and all you've got is cracked pavements and nobody using it. The aim is to get as many people using it as absolutely possible. I think rather than me rabbit on for lots and lots of time, I'm happy to talk about any of the things I talked about, or to run through the route a bit, or any of the other things that you'd like, really. But
okay. Thank you, Mr. Cohn. That was really, really interesting. You've given us a really good insight into what the project entails. And I do have some questions myself first, and then I'll hand it over to other members. First of all, did I hear correctly? You're looking at a metal surface for the cycle route?
No, sorry, metalled. Sorry, tarmac surface.
Metalled. So, okay, so tarmacked. And is it 2 meters or 3 meters that you're looking at in the width?
So the advice from Sustrans and in the technical advice is for 3 meters. That allows 2 cyclists to pass going in opposite directions safely. Yeah. Now, that's not going to be possible in every part of the route, and our route is about 60% off-road and about 40% on-road. So the on-road sections are all in quiet country lanes, but actually we are trying to get all of them specified as quiet lanes, and that's all in progress at the moment. That's really important as well, because the success of quiet lanes is about engagement with local communities. Yes. So the technical advice from the people who did them to begin with is that the people who drive quickest along those lanes are all the locals, because they know where all the bends are. So actually, you need to engage the local population with those.
Yes.
But the metal surface, there are 3 sorts of surfaces that you can put on. You could just have a mountain bike type surface, which is hard and then muddy in the winter, or there are surfaces with chippings, either the stuff that where they dig up the roads and road scrapings, that's right, or granite or limestone. And there are quite a few successful cycleways with those sorts of surfaces, but they do require a lot more maintenance and they're likely to sort of wash away. There is a new rubberized surface which they're trying in the Peak District, which we don't have, I don't think, enough information on yet. But the reality is that the tarmac surface is the one that offers the most utility for the most number of users.
Yeah. Okay, I've got that. So sections of the route and anticipated cost are the 2 issues that I was just looking at. So the sections of the route, have you broken it down into manageable pieces?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Okay, so it's in 3 sections. The easiest section is the Corkershaw to Earlscoln section. And that's because the 2 major landowners in there are both very positive about the cycleway. So that's Marks Hall Estate and the owners of the business park at Earlscoln. So that gives you a flying start.
Yeah.
And we've actually got planning permission for the EC to Corkershaw section. And there is a section 106 bit of money for part of the northern section. That cost is probably going to be in the region of $250,000. And that's because the original costs were around half that amount, but they were for a chipping surface. And the new chair of Mark's Hall estate is a keen cyclist, and he wants the cycleway to be as available to everybody as possible and to be all weathers. And there is another element to that, which is about motorbikers and quad bikers using cycleways, which obviously you don't want to encourage. And the advice from Sustrans is that motorbikers and quad bikers hate tarmac surfaces because they're very boring. They want muddy tracks.
Okay.
So actually there's an advantage to having a metal surface, you know, in terms of for a number of reasons.
Yeah.
So that's the Earl's Colne to Corkershaw section.
Right.
The Earl's Colne to Halstead section is, again, apart from crossing the A1124, is again probably one of the easier sections because it runs along either a quiet lane or the old railway track, the old Colne Valley railway track. So the landowner there has given permission for our use of the old railway track.
Yes.
But you have to cross the A1124 twice, once at the Earl's Colne end and once at the Halstead end. The Earl's Colne end is in a 30-mile-an-hour limit zone, which, I mean, while it's not brilliant, at least it's achievable. At the other end, you have to cross from the elevated section, which was the old railway track, and find a way across the A1124, and that's going to be a problem.
Okay.
So either it's going to be bridged, and the bridge would cost somewhere in the region of 2 million, or a lesser solution would be to ramp down and cross the road at road level. So any of those options are going to cost some money. The main part of the route would be about 1.5 kilometers along the old railway track, and then you're looking at somewhere in the region of 800 grand per kilometer, but it might be much cheaper than that. It depends on the number of obstacles in there. The worst bit, the most difficult bit, is Kelvin to Corkershaw. There are 3 potential routes that we're exploring there. 2 of them are alongside the B1024 on the west and on the east side. There are a mixture of landowners, some of which are favourable, but also want to develop their own, want to encourage development along that section, and so one doesn't know whether the enthusiasm is contingent upon the development. Some of the landowners are definitely not keen, and so in some ways we're exploring that simply because there need to be options when one goes to a public consultation. And the third is using the Fearing Road, which a lot of the route is potentially owned by highways, which makes it in some ways easier. But then, of course, it goes to Fearing, not to Kelvin. Okay. And so you end up having to then find a way from Fearing to Kelvin station. Potentially, there are some advantages to that if you're thinking about, in the future, access to Mark's Tay. So my grand grandiose plan would be with this north-south route to cross with an east-west route. And the east-west route would ideally be along the current A120. Once the new A120 comes into place, potentially then you would have an east-west route which would connect Braintree to Colchester. It would cross over this north-south route, and you could see the whole thing then connecting many different settlements and towns, and also through to the national cycling network. So, you know, potentially in the future, the way I'm seeing this is that if we want people to cycle, we need to create the infrastructure to allow them to do it.
Have highways indicated that they would put in cycle routes along that new road?
So along the new road,
along the new A120. So have they not committed?
So I that's a discussion that we haven't really had yet. At the moment, the new A120 has just been passed over to the National Highways people, and they are looking at the evidence that Essex Highways have already produced.
Right.
In gear change, there is a suggestion that if you're putting a new major road in, then you should put a cycleway alongside it. But potentially, there is already a route between Braintree and Witham, and potentially that route would connect with different railway stations along that route. And so I know Councillor Abbott in Witham is very keen to promote that as a route. The existing A120 obviously connects Braintree directly with Colchester, with Colchester routes. So that's a very, that would make a very, very good set of connections if you could achieve that. I mean, it's too early, really. I don't know how long it will take for the new A120 to be constructed, but I'm sure we're looking at sort of 10 to 15 years. But in my view, that's my timescale anyway, is that this lot will take 10 to 15 years to do.
Right. So we're actually looking from Helsted to Kelvin, then not Earlscombe to Kelvin, aren't we? It's sort of got, it's added. So
that's why it's got plus on it now. How far, what is the distance of cycle route? Have you worked it out at all, or is it? It's about 15 miles.
About 15 miles in total.
Yeah. I mean, it will depend on what routes are available between Coggeshall and Kelvin.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Cohn. That's wonderful. I'm going to open it up now to members. So do members have any questions, and could you please indicate by the chat function, please? Councillor Mrs. Parker.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, thank you, Mr. Cohn. That was really very interesting, informative, and quite ambitious, I must admit. Which is great, you know, to have ambition like that. Just a couple of questions. Firstly, do you think that on an old railway line it is necessary to have any additional surfacing at all? I mean, I grew up next to an old railway line, and we used to ride our bikes along there with no trouble at all. But I don't know whether that would, just because we were riding children's bikes and, you know, proper bikes, this wouldn't be adequate. And the second question is, who do you envisage will be using these routes? I know you've said that you'd like to get as many people as possible using it, but one of my sort of always have in the back of my mind with cycle routes is obviously it's very great for people going to work, actually particularly for people commuting, because they don't have to pay the £7 charge per day to park their car or whatever it is at Kelvin Station now, and you know, gives them some exercise and everything. But I don't know how useful it is for obviously people going to the supermarket or
other people who are traveling for other reasons. So I just was wondering who you would envisage would be most likely to use the route and for what purposes. Thanks.
So I think your first question about surfaces is a type of bike type question. So there are obviously sort of three main types of bike, which are the mountain bike, then there's the hybrids, and then road bikes with narrow wheels. So mountain bikes can cope with the sorts of uneven road surfaces that you would encounter if you didn't put any sort of surface down. I mean, clearly seasonality comes into it then, because they become impassable in the winter, and the last year has shown that. I mean, everybody will be familiar with footpaths that have just become foot deep in mud, and are not usable, and that the chippings type road surface. I was looking at a cycleway up in the Peak District, which had that sort of surface. It had a limestone chipping surface, and what they were saying is that in every year they had to maintain it. They would. I know we don't have the sort of hills there, but here they do there. But every year parts of it were washed away, and they had to replace it. Now, even on that Earl's Colne to Halstead section, there's a runoff from fields which make part of that old railway line very boggy. And so if you want people to use it who have hybrids or road bikes, then it becomes unusable. And that, I think, brings me on to the second question, which is what sort of people will use cycleways. So the first set of people that I'm looking at are the commuters. So we've got on our route, we've got two industrial parks, very large industrial parks. They will have huge numbers of workers. We haven't counted up all the workers on the Bluebridge estate at Halstead, but that's bigger than the Earl's Colne estate. And we have done a piece of work there looking at all of the businesses and how many people would cycle to work either from Corkershaw or from Earl's Colne. And roughly a quarter of the people who said they would cycle at the moment do cycle. And the reason for that is that the roads are treacherous. The road from Earl's Colne to Corkershaw is absolutely treacherous. I think worse than I think it's treacherous in a car, let alone on a bicycle. The one between Corkershaw and Kelvin is tricky, but is also quite difficult. There have been 2 cyclist deaths one on each of those 2 roads that I know about. So the first lot are those commuters to parts of the route, that have large estates on. The second bit of commuting is obviously the commute to Kelvin station. And we know that already, even without a cycleway, that is, I think it was in BDC's previous policy, that was the 10th most used commute in the district. Even before then, I know a lot of people in Corkershaw who would commute to Kelvin, who work in London, would commute if the roads were safer. Then you've got leisure cyclists. Now, I mean, the thing that we saw in the first lockdown was absolute explosion in families cycling. And from my perspective, all that shows is that if you can produce a safe cycleway, then people will use it for leisure. And we've got some very attractive things on offer, haven't we? I mean, the Arboretum itself is incredibly attractive. The Colne Valley routes, very attractive. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for leisure. And then that would bring me on to tourism. So actually, I started this from the perspective of the Corkershaw Neighbourhood Plan and wanting to do something to help the economy of Corkershaw. I'm desperately keen that it just doesn't become a dormitory for people working elsewhere, because that would rip out the heart of it. You need the shops, you need the restaurants and the cafes and pubs and so on, and all of those things are at risk if you don't have people coming into Corkershaw for tourism. You know, it's an attractive place, but if there's nothing there, people won't come. I can absolutely envisage, if you could get the east-west section going, that we could promote a route that came from London to Kelvin station, cycled through Coggeshall, then to Braintree, then join the Flitchway, go all the way to Bishop Stortford, and then back into London. You could see how you could promote that sort of route with people stopping at various points along the way at the Arboretum or wherever, or going up the Colne Valley, you know, and create tourism and help the local economy. And the final thing would be about cargo bikes. It's very common on the continent to see cargo bikes being used. We used to use them in my youth. I could remember the butcher's bike and all of those sorts of things. Very little use now, but absolutely no reason why they shouldn't be. And you can see, if you look at the Dutch example, or even examples in London now, that cargo bikes are much more. And then you've just got people out for a walk, you know, with the pushchair and just going for a short walk. But those are the main types.
Thank you, Mr. Cohen, and thank you, Councillor Iona Parker, for your question. It was very interesting, actually. I believe we've got, who have we got next, Emma? Is it Councillor Mrs. Wilson or Councillor?
It's Councillor Wright first of all, please.
Councillor Wright first, please. Councillor Wright, would you like to ask a question, please?
Yeah, hello, Peter. Well, most of my questions, or three of my questions, have been answered already, but the cost, you said it's about 800k per kilometre. Is that including the land cost of buying the land if the farmer doesn't want to give it up freely?
So it's very difficult, I think, to give an outline cost, because the obstacles in each particular area are going to be quite different. So that 800k, that was an outline cost given me by Sustrans for a safe cycleway, including obstacles. I don't think it includes purchase of land. What you're generally, or what we've been generally hoping for, is a permissive right across landowners' land, and that's what we've got on the Coggeshall all the way through to Halstead section, permissive rights. Now, clearly, there need to be agreements there that permission is not withdrawn at a whim, if you like. Clearly, from Marks Hall and the industrial estate's perspective, they've every incentive to want to create a permissive right. On the old railway line, that's a much more altruistic perspective from the landowner, but there is an advantage to the landowner, because we can change an existing public right of way, which currently wanders over his fields, and that will run alongside the cycle route. So that creates a bit of an incentive. And at the moment, the old railway line is unusable. So you know, a permissive route would be acceptable. So I think as far as cost is concerned, I'm really eagerly waiting for the feasibility study from the technical team at Essex Highways to get a much more accurate idea of cost. And clearly it's much more difficult to get fundraising if you don't have an accurate idea of the cost. So I can't give you a proper answer at the moment.
No, I just wanted to know if that was you know, how calculated that guess was, you know, the 800
No,
K.
it's the biggest, widest guess you can.
I know. It could be anywhere from 200K to 1.5 million. I mean, you said the bridge is likely to cost 2 million for just a short stretch.
Well, that's the obstacle question is clearly an important one. But then one of the things that I think from council's perspective and about infrastructure is that these things can be, you know, a major attraction as well. If you look at the bridge that's been created in Newcastle, you know, it's a beautiful piece of work. And so you can see that some of these things that are practical infrastructure things can also be an attraction in themselves. You know, it depends how you're looking at them, I guess.
Yeah. On the point I was going to bring up is talking about the A120 and the A12 is going ahead a lot faster. They are highways, because I've been on further meetings, they are looking to put cycleways on the existing A12 and along the new A12 where possible. And they are looking at that to make sure it's easier to cross over the new road as well as the old road with cycleways. So they are featuring that into new roads. You know, I know that from first-hand experience, so I imagine they do the same when the A120 starts going off. So, you know, that's going to be a positive.
Absolutely. And you know, to add to that, I think that it should be an ambition for Braintree for its cycle routes to be connected to the National Cycling Network. If you want to increase the amount of tourism coming into the to the area, then a connection with the National Cycling Network is, I think, you know, a real ambition that we should have. I mean, that old Colne Valley route goes all the way to Cambridge. Can you imagine a route that goes from Cambridge to our area, to Colchester?
Yeah.
It's you know, I mean, I shouldn't really talk about that as the pie in the sky, but you know,
no, a dream is worth having.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. Councillor Mrs. Wilson, please, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, it's not really a question because I'm not sure there's an answer, but I'm just slightly concerned about the amount of hours when there is no daylight, it's very dark. Would any of these cycle routes be adequate to be able to bike along during twilight or darkness, especially if you're commuting?
So I think the answer to that is that there's no intention at the moment to light them. I mean, cycling does tend to be more of a seasonal activity. I think, you know, it's likely that there will be less people cycling in the winter than in the summer. It's just you know, it's just much more pleasant. I think some of the cycleway goes through protected dark areas. Certainly in the Corkershaw neighbourhood plan, the Marks Hall section is categorized as dark sky area, and you wouldn't want to put lighting through that. So that will limit the use for some people for some of the time. And I think that's the sort of compromise that you know, you might need to expect. The part between Corkershaw and Kelvin, we haven't at the moment thought of lighting it. There are low lighting opportunities with sort of bollard type lighting, which are seen, and some of the German and Dutch examples that I've seen, they have that sort of lighting. But you know, I suspect that the more doughty commuters will probably use it in the winter, and there will be less other users.
Yeah, and I think we might find some sort of entrepreneurial sort of bicycle manufacturer will come out with some kind of lighting device that is attached to the bike as opposed to.
I mean, they would need to, cyclists cycling at dark will need to be well lit anyway, because otherwise it's quite dangerous.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mrs. Wilson. I have a question from Councillor Mrs. Pell, please. Would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Chairman. Peter, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your enthusiasm and all the hard work that you've put into this, because I also see it from the cycling group that you are so dedicated over it. But going back to the Houston situation and crossing that main road, where the railway line sort of comes down to the Blue Bridge estate. Is there no possibility of coming through the Blue Bridge estate and some of that land abutting the Blue Bridge estate? We have developers that are trying to get permission.
Chairman, sorry to interrupt, Ms. Kane. Whilst I don't wish to stifle members in asking questions, they're asking it's a very specific development question, which whilst I know Mr. Cohen will be quite keen to sort of answer members' questions, I'm mindful that this is a public meeting that's on the YouTube, which other people can look at, and this may be a sensitive conversation, particularly if you are looking at alternative lines for cycleways. I'll leave it for Mr. Cohen if he wishes to answer, but I'm just put that caution there for members and Mr. Cohen. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there are several different possibilities to cross the A1124. The most attractive from a cycleway perspective would be a bridge. But there are 2 or 3 other possibilities which the group is exploring at the moment. Each of them would have different costs and would require different permissions to be able to do. So I think it's one of those questions that's in the melting pot at the moment. I mean, as far as the scrutiny group is concerned, I think you should just have a view to major obstacles on any of these cycling paths. There will be major obstacles on each of them, and some of them will be quite expensive to manage, but you know, it will in the end will come down to a sort of cost benefit analysis, I think. And you know, you want to have an analysis of the amount of people who you think will use the cycleway compared to the cost of bridging major obstacles. So I think as far as that one is concerned, I'm aware of at least 4 different possibilities at the moment for that crossing.
Thank you, Mr. Kong, for answering that. That's great. I don't appear to have any more questions. Just finally ask everybody, does anybody else want to ask Mr. Kong any more questions at all? Could I ask a question? You can. I have got another councillor, but yes, please do. Please go ahead.
Was it just simply what the output of the scrutiny committee is likely to be, and whether it would be able to support the strategy as it goes through, and you know what happens from here with this piece of work.
Chairman, would you wish me to address that for you?
That's very kind. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you. Mr. Cohn, so the scrutiny review is really looking at the authority through the lens of the terms of reference. So yes, we do have the fledgling cycling strategy that was considered by all members at full council last month, and members are aware that it's going to go to consultation. But what this scrutiny committee will do is effectively look at, is the authority addressing the matters raised through the scrutiny, looking at walking and cycling. So after they conducted evidence gathering, all their evidence gathering, and that can include reflecting on the emerging cycling strategy. It's an enduring document, we hope, and this committee will look at that strategy as it emerges alongside with the research that comes out through the survey stakeholder engagement that's due to take place. And what the scrutiny committee is to make recommendations to the executive, so the cabinet. So if they feel through their scrutiny review that the strategy falls short in some way, based upon the evidence they've seen, they could make a recommendation to the executive to consider taking a particular route within the strategy, or to plug a gap, something simpler. Or they could also make recommendations to other sectors such as Essex County Council or any other partnership working. So at this stage, this is very early days in terms of their scrutiny review, but the published report, which will evolve at the end of this scrutiny review, will set out its list of recommendations based upon its evidence and how it goes forward. So it's very possible that there'll be a series of recommendations that will reflect on the emerging cycling strategy, or about the longevity about that strategy, or things that they would like the executive to consider further on future strategies or associated policies. This committee, as I say, is just started this review, and they are going to look at other aspects of council services, planning policy. So once they've sort of examined all those areas, it is possible that there'll be recommendations which will ask the executive to do a particular thing, or to look at investing in a particular thing. But at this stage, I couldn't sort of identify where that sits. But it is very common through the scrutiny process that there is positive recommendations made to the cabinet, which are very often well received and actioned going forward. And I wouldn't say that this scrutiny review would be any different from those previously taken by the scrutiny committees of the authority. So I'm ever so sorry, I'm a bit vague at the moment, but this is very early doors.
No, that's perfectly all right. Thank you.
And some of the things is also holding the executives account. So if something happens during the life of the scrutiny review that sort of looks at the impacts upon the terms of reference of what this committee can look at, then they can pose certain questions to the individual cabinet member or the executive as a whole around how they propose to deal with something.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you very much. Mr. Cohen, I do have another councillor who would like to ask a question, Councillor Hensman. Councillor Hensman, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's purely on the isolation of the route, and interest in where it's grown. I've been following it for the past few years. If the cost somewhat surprised me, because it's not far short of how much a railway line costs. But if it were to connect to the national network, then perhaps you would be able to attract more. And whilst I don't want to give you extra work, if your ambition is to get to Kelvin, that little bit further south, you can link into Route 1, or slightly east, you can go to 13, or even come this way to Braintree and get onto 16. And that network and that circular route for the tourism, where you could go up London, the Colne Valley or the Flitch Way, and bring the tourism. I've done London to Brighton, so well used to seeing events like that. And obviously you need the high quality paths in order for the sort of bike that I ride, because the roads just are not suitable at all. I dread going over potholes that my bike's going to shatter, but there you go. So it's just sort of the ambitions there, and already you've gone from Earl's Cone across to Halstead, but it's whether there is any scope to try and join up to that national network in order to attract that all-important tourism and the extra funding that you might be able to get. Thank you.
I think the answer to your question is yes. I mean, I think there is every opportunity. If you view EC2K as a north-south, well, then veering off to the west cycleway, the obvious other part would be Braintree to Marks Tay, because that then connects you to Colchester. The current route will connect you into the A12, which connects then to Witham and Chelmsford. So the aim, I think, will be to grow all of these things in, it's the usual how do you eat the elephant, isn't it? Slowly in chunks. So the ambition I would have is that we're able to achieve the Earl's Colne to Corkershaw section in this year. If we're able to do that, then I think that will provide impetus for the other two sections of this route. And then, there are other routes that I'm aware of in the district, which I think would be equally useful and would connect all of these things together. But the big one is going to be the old A120 between Marks Tay and Braintree, because that then potentially connects all sorts of stuff. And it would be easy to see, wouldn't it, to see that you're advertising in London for a route that goes through all of this wonderful countryside that connects the Arboretum and so on, has been and then promotes all of the businesses in all of the villages that it passes through. And I think that's got to be a major long-term ambition. But I would envisage within the next 15 years anyway that we will be seeing a revolution in road usage, and with electric cars and sharing cars and all of those sorts of things, cycling is going to become much, much bigger.
Thank you very much, Mr. Colne. I don't think we have any more questions, and I'm so grateful that you've spent so much time with us this evening to detail everything that you've done so far tonight. And the work that you've done is absolutely commendable. I mean, I'm surprised at how far you've come and the work that you're doing, and I wish you every success with that. And I do hope that our councils will support you in the project. So I think we'll draw a line there and say thank you to members as well. This concludes our evidence gathering session. And thank you, Mr. Colne, for your responses you provided. I'm most grateful, and you can either leave the meeting or you're perfectly welcome to stay, whichever you would prefer.
If you don't mind, I've got something else to do, so I'll leave you here, but happy to take any questions at a later date if there's something further that you'd like to know.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening.
Goodbye.
Members, based on the information gathered this evening, we now need to consider any further lines of inquiry we wish to pursue in order to inform our scrutiny review. Do members have any suggestions? And please indicate on the chat function if you wish to speak.
Chairman, would it help at this point if I just sort of outline where, I know we've got another agenda item yet that we need to speak to, but at this stage, would you just like me to outline where we currently are in terms of what we'd like to do with the next meetings that we've got coming forward?
That would be very helpful, thank you.
Okay, so members, last time we got together, we discussed what sort of things you'd like to do, and you did actually talk about doing a survey, and we were quite encouraged that members were going to sort of engage with us to start pulling that together. As officers, we were making inquiries as to whether we can use the council's people's panel. Now, obviously, when we were having that conversation, we were not aware of the cycling strategy special meeting of full council and the consultation exercise that was going to be taken. Now, because the cycling strategy was debated at full council and all members got the opportunity to talk on that cycling strategy, and you agreed as full council to put that document out to a stakeholder engagement, a 6-week stakeholder engagement, which will take place following PERDA. So obviously PERDA ceased on the day after the day of the elections. We were just mindful that we would be putting out what would be perceived to be quite a similar survey to capture similar information on the strategy. So I did discuss this with the chairman outside the meeting to obviously get a view, but on the basis that there is a broader public engagement opportunity on the cycling strategy, and that's a document that this committee would want to sort of look at, we considered it was appropriate to delay our survey on walking and cycling, because obviously we don't want people to not complete our survey if they've already, think that they've already completed it for the cycling strategy. And it's about making sure we've got the right timing. So we've paused the idea of doing our own survey because it's going to be useful to be able to engage with the lead officers on the draft cycling strategy and the cabinet member to ask them to come at a later meeting of this committee to look at the draft strategy, how it's emerging and the feedback. And then obviously that's something that you can reflect upon as part of the scrutiny review as to whether the district council is kind of doing the right thing for the encouraging walking and cycling in the districts, because the strategy will be an emerging document, it will be an enduring document, so you can look at it. So so there wasn't survey fatigue. We are going to put that off for the time being. So what we're proposing is at the next meeting, which is our meeting on 23rd of June, is to start inviting our planning policy officers and the planning officers who deal with Section 106 monies, because as you've heard this evening, Mr. Cohen's made reference to how it's important to get finance in the right places, the use of Section 106 monies, and also, to look at we've got the right policies in place. Now, I do know that, I do accept that we've got the emerging local plan, and that in itself has got to go through its process. So, again, we've got a bit of a clash, but certainly we'd like to invite planning policy officers to come along to our next meeting so they can talk about the council's policies that are in place in the current local plan and the emerging local plan around cycling and pedestrianisation, and how we engage through the cycling and cycling for leisure, commuters, and the same as walking for leisure and commuting. So that is what our plan is for the moment. Now, the only caveat I will put on the meeting on the 23rd of June, without obviously going into too much detail, as members know, the our ability to hold virtual meetings comes to an end first week in May. So we are looking at how we are going to be managing our meetings going forward. So At the moment, there's no change to the timetable for this committee, but if we do need to have to manage our committees and decision-making process because of changes we're going to have to make as a result of the end of the virtual meeting ability, then we might have to reshuffle it. But so going forward, we'd like to bring 2 officer witnesses to the next meeting. As I say, planning policy and section 106s. I'd like to be able to invite Neil Jones, as members know who sat on other scrutiny committee. Neil Jones is an excellent officer who's been very generous with his time over the years, explaining around 106s and how money can be obtained to do improvements which are associated with developments. I know we have members of the planning committee sitting on this scrutiny committee, so obviously they've got a huge amount of knowledge around section 106s and how they can be used for development. But obviously it's always worthwhile having our officers because they can talk in some very wide context to make sure that members' knowledge on 106s is all on the same level. And obviously around planning policies, because not all members, although I do acknowledge that you all make the decision as members of full council on the local plan. And again, we have members on the planning committee who are very, very versed with policies around cycling, etc. But we'd like to bring those key officers in because you may have some individual questions that you might want to ask around how those policies work, whether we have the right policies in place, etc. So that's the intention for the moment, which I hope meets members' broad approval going forwards. But as I say, we're not saying no to survey, we're just saying we need to at a more appropriate time because we don't want to sort of miss an opportunity. We'd also then at another meeting, and it'll probably be our autumn meeting, that we bring the cabinet member with the draft cycling strategy and with the feedback that has been received through that stakeholder engagement as well. So that's what we are planning for members going forward, which I hope meets your approval on broad terms, but and we'll work that up into part of a more formal timetable for you as we go forward. Is that helpful, Councillor Garrett?
That's very helpful. Thank you, Emma, for outlining that. And we'll wait to see how the meetings, what happens with the meetings.
On the chat function, I've got Mrs. Parker. Mrs. Parker, did you have a question? Or...
Yes, please. Just 2 points. Could we make sure that when Neil Jones comes to address us, he also covers the HRA provisions, which is the habitat regulation assessments, because we do collect money for that. And the whole point of that is to prevent people dog walking in and walking around the Ramsar sites, the sort of the scientific, the environmentally sensitive sites around the coast. And really it should be going towards creating walking routes near where people live. So that's actually particularly important. And also I was just wondering whether as an evidence gathering exercise, it would be helpful to have the officer or an officer from Essex County Council who deals with public rights of way, because we focus quite a lot on cycling, but obviously this is walking and cycling strategy. And we've just heard that one of the purposes of the cycling is leisure, but obviously walking is very much leisure activity for people as well, and relevant for health. And we do have a network of public rights of way, some of which are better than others, and it just might be useful, I think, possibly to have someone coming to talk to us about that.
We certainly did have identified on our long-term project to have county officers come forward. It's just make sure that we get the right officers. Certainly the 3Ps officers have been identified as officers that we could approach. So we will certainly look to do that, because as you say, this is about walking and cycling. At the moment, we've just started with the focus on cycling because obviously it's been very elevated in the council business at the moment. But yes, certainly the walking for leisure and commuting, that's why we're looking at some other services within the organisation who are looking around pedestrianisation, but how they sort of look to incorporate those within schemes. So we hope that we will have all areas sort of touched upon, but certainly that's on it. We'll add that to the list of other potential witnesses to engage with.
I would certainly support that, Councillor Parker. I think that's a very good Very good idea. I don't think that we should get too bogged down with the cycling, because I think the walking is equally as important, especially in the rural areas as well.
Well, there is the connections through the Rights of Way network, which has already been touched upon. So we certainly probably would like the Rights of Way officers to give views, particularly where public rights of way being adopted into the cycleway network. Certainly, as a former rights of way officer myself, I used to not always be happy to discover that my bridleway has now become a fully functioning cycle path. So, but certainly we'll make those approaches for you. So, but if members do have any other ideas, Chairman, if they'd like to email myself or Jessica Mann, then we can certainly build those into the programme and speak to the relevant corporate directors and lead officers within the council to make sure that we're getting the right people before you to give you good value evidence so you can make the recommendations to the executive in the fullness of time.
That's lovely. Thank you, Emma. Okay, so we've got no more formal recommendations. So as Emma said, if you wish to email her with anything after the meeting, then please do so, or Jessica. So we will now proceed to agenda item 6, the scrutiny review into cycling and walking in the Braintree District, Essex County Council online resources research. Members, the report for this item is set out on pages 5 to 12 of the agenda. Please could I ask Emma Wisby, Governance and Members Manager, to set out the report?
Thank you, Chairman. So members, at the last committee, one of the areas that was identified is, what are one of the barriers to walking and cycling? So our first protocol was, well, what information is already out there? Does the council need to duplicate? Should we duplicate? Do we need to signpost? So we took a look at the County Council's website. The reason why the County Council's website was identified is because they are the highway authority. They are the authority who's responsible for cycleways, and they're also the authority responsible for the rights of way network. So most people who want to find out about walking and cycling would look at the County Council's website. So research was conducted by myself, Jessica Mann and Councillor Weeks, who we all had our own little venture into the County Council's website, which being quite frank with you, it was not the most easiest of websites to negotiate to find the information that we were particularly looking at. And what we have discovered is we've tried to set out a report, and we've contained hyperlinks because there is an awful lot of resource on the County Council's website. But it's quite well hidden, because whilst you may go on the County Council's website, you actually go to a microsite, which is the Essex Highways. And if you're a member of the public and not very well versed with local government, it can be a little bit tricky as to, sort of how you find that information. But once you're there, there is a huge amount of documents. And those documents which we thought were pertinent to the members' scrutiny review, we have put hyperlinks in, and the plans that Councillor Weeks has established, we've attached the principal plans to the report, but obviously then we've got hyperlinks through the report. So we do hope that members, upon receipt of the agenda, did have an opportunity to look at those documents through the hyperlinks and where we have reflected on their content. So the walk-in element, this is really sort of falls into two sections. You've got the public rights of way and walk-in. Now, the public rights of way is the traditional links to the definitive map and various other links to external groups like Visit Essex and the county park. So very much around the leisure walking side, and there was links to the Essex walking strategy. Now, members, as part of your scrutiny review, this is probably one of the documents that you might want to have a look at, because obviously this is the County Council's document about walk-in, and it was a document that was created in response to the government's requirement for the highway authorities to produce a walk-in strategy as part of their local transport plan. So it's one of their key documents. So the report touches upon the strategy. Now, the version we found on the County Council's website is the version of 2001, so it has been around for nearly 20, well, for over 20 years. And it sort of talks about walking. So we would recommend to members that you do have a look at this document if you've not previously had the opportunity. We've also provided you a link with the local transport plan, which is the County Council's approach to transport in Essex. And in the report, we've set out what the transport plan is. And again, this is quite another historic document. Now, it's not uncommon for an authority like Essex County Council to have some enduring policies that are designed to be for a number of years because of the nature of highways. You know, as you heard from our previous speaker, they take considerable amount of time to create. There's a number of factors that have to be sort of considered, which means that a highway creation and cycleway creation and walking creation is not something that can simply be done overnight. So you do expect the County Council's policies to be have a longer span than maybe some other aspects. In terms of commuter walking, and didn't seem to be too much information. So if you're a member of the public and you want to find out about safe commuting routes, there wasn't a huge amount of information that we could see that would signpost people around. And then comparing that to cycling, there was a substantial amount of information on cycling. There was everything from local maps and initiatives. So there was a series of plans that showed you your cycling routes in certain areas, you know, that would be suitable for leisure cycling or fitness cycling, and number of programs and strategies, which, you know, series of hyperlinks. So there's a huge amount of signposting information on the County Council's website. So if you are a person who's interested in getting into cycling, County Council's website is your hub, and then you can go off to various charities who are interested in cycling. One that the links is Sustained, who Mr. Collins made mention of. So it's not a comprehensive sort of this is everything about cycling, but it's signposts of resources. It doesn't seek to duplicate. So it's got its current cycling strategy on there, which is November 16, and that sort of sets out the county's approach to cycling, which is reflective of some of the things that Mr. Conan was saying. And what we've also included in the report to help members sort of look at the resources on the County Council's website is a number of hyperlinks about how to get round. So that's where you get into the maps, Discover Essex by bike. Again, that's another a set of documents to encourage people to go and explore the county by boats. There's maps and route planners on there, so there's some very useful resources for people to sort of get around. So that's the kind of thing we wouldn't sort of want to be duplicated on our website, but maybe looking at our website to how we communicate that on. We've also provided a list of walking links and resources, so like the Public Rights of Way network. So if somebody wants to, we do have people who come to the council and say, oh, can I look at your deposit copy of the definitive map? We say, well, it's paper copy, it's not the live document. You would be better off looking at the County Council's interactive map. So we've included all those resources there. And we've also included landing pages for accessible transport, and also the information on the Braintree Local Cycling Walking Infrastructure Plan, which again is a document that we would recommend that the members get familiar with in terms of looking at the longevity of this scrutiny review. We've also included the major plans that we found, Council Weeks found on cycling. The disappointing thing is a lot of the plans of Braintree are focused on town centres and town centre routes, and a lot of the leisure maps are not necessarily within our district, but certainly things that can be accessed from our districts. So that's a really quick canter through what we found on the County Council's website. There is a huge amount of information there, but it does rely on people having a certain amount of knowledge, experience of searching on websites. Obviously, not wanting to be critical of the County Council, but as it is the the highway authority, the authority who is responsible for putting a lot of these infrastructure in place, there is a question mark about how user friendly it is to find that information. And if one of the hurdles is for the public because they don't know where to get the information to get involved in those activities, or to safely get involved in those activities, or to sort of know if they're actually walking on the right pathway, sort of knowing about the context. It's very difficult to drill down into. So that would be my observation, that it does rely on a certain amount of knowledge. It's not necessarily intuitive, and you kind of need to know what you're looking for, or be very proficient at online searching.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma. That's a really good overview of what I've been looking at today on the Essex County Council website. I will be looking for questions from members in a moment, but I'd just like to highlight some of my own observations. One thing was that I found that with regards to public rights of way, there is an Essex user group, and they have meetings 3 times a year at County Hall. But nowhere could I find the minutes of those meetings, and that is something that I would like to get my hands on if officers are able to help me with that one. I also found that there is a public rights of way user satisfaction survey. Now, it opened on the 1st of September 2019, and it closes the 1st of April 2030. So it's a really long consultation. But I just wondered if we could ask Essex if there was any data available to date, because I'd really like to know what sort of satisfaction there is out there, because that might help us. Instead of having our own survey, we could gather information from that. With regards to walking groups, I had a look. Yes, walking groups. There's a list of groups advertised on the Essex County Council website, and mostly they're ramblers. So we have Brentwood Ramblers, Colchester Ramblers, Malden and Chelmsford Ramblers, and various other groups. There were a couple of walking groups where the server wasn't found, which I found very difficult. One of those, which was the Stour Walking Group and Walking in Essex. But there was nothing in Braintree. I was very disappointed to see that. I know there are walking groups in Braintree, and I'm just wondering why they're not linking their websites to the Essex website. So that might be something worth looking at, and just seeing if we can maybe encourage them so that we can open that up to the community. And looking at the Essex walking strategy, which is August 2001, it actually quotes data going back to 1985 and 1986, and the Transport White Paper that was then quite new in 1998. It also quoted an Essex and Southend replacement structure plan, but there was data within that talked about pedestrian journeys and cycle trips, and it was under policy T6 within Essex. And it says that the information is collected in the Essex Travel Diary. And it says that this is the source of information on modes of travel and is likely to be carried, it's likely to be checked or reviewed every 2 years. So I wondered if we could maybe have a look at that and see if we could find anything there from Essex. And there was the implementation plan, which is linked to the Essex Transport Strategy 2011. I couldn't find any documents about the implementation plan, but it says that it provides greater detail on how the outcomes of the strategy will be delivered and monitored, and that will be retested every 3 years. I couldn't find that documentation. I felt that all of those might be quite relevant to us in some way if we're scrutinising what information is available and how people travel around. That might be something worth looking at. So they were my observations today. Could I then open it up to members and ask you if you've looked at some of those hyperlinks that officers have provided for us, and what your findings were? And Councillor Councillor Andrew Hensman has put up some links there, which might be helpful. Thank you, Councillor Hensman.
That's the minutes you're looking for, Chairman.
Oh, thank you very much. Is it a recent one?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, I'll look at that later. Thank you.
December 2020.
Great. Okay, any members have any questions on this? Okay, thank you, members. So based on the report before us, we're asked to give consideration to any further lines of inquiry or areas of research that we'd like to pursue in order to support the scrutiny review and going forward. So if you have no further suggestions, I'd ask that you consider those and perhaps put them forward to officers when you've had a chance to really drill down and look into that.
Okay, so Chairman, so if we follow up on the documents that you've made reference to see if we can secure the data from the County Council, and then we can provide that to members in the fullness of time, because of we need to make sure that we can identify the correct officers at the county to retrieve that. Also, just looking at the Essex Ramblers link that Councillor Hensman has very kindly provided. There's again an awful lot of information on here. So again, if you're a keen rambler and already sort of again, so it's the expectation that you are somebody who's already engaged in that community and in that that exercises. Again, it's got a huge amount of links back to the County Council's information, such as the interactive rights of way map. It's also got various apps linking to and notices regarding diversions, because obviously the rights of way network is subject to change, be it on a temporary or permanent basis. So we can also have a look at just do a summary of this, and if there's anything that we feel needs to be brought to members' attention, we can bring that back as part of a later paper to the committee as well, members.
Thank you very much, Emma. That's really helpful.
Thank you.
So finally, members, we are asked to formally note the report and the suggestions made in respect of further lines of inquiry. Please, can I take it then that the report and the suggestions have been noted, and I will take silence as assent. Thank you, members. The report and suggestions have been noted, and I'll now proceed to agenda item 7, urgent business. I don't believe there is any urgent business this evening.
No, Chairman, we're not on notice for urgent business to be taken. Thank you.
Thank you. So members, this item concludes our business for the evening. I'll therefore close the meeting of the Community Development Group at, let's see what the time is. It is 20:57. And I'd like to thank you, members, for your attendance this evening, and to those watching the broadcast via the Council's YouTube channel. And I'll now hand back the meeting to our facilitator.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Before I ask the webcaster to terminate the broadcast, I would like to remind you that the Council will retain performance data relating to your connection to the meeting in the event of a legal challenge to this new way of holding meetings. Can the webcaster please confirm that the broadcast has ceased?